Last week, we talked about planting seeds. This week, we're talking about pulling weeds. Well, you know the two go together. Every gardener knows that planting seeds is the easy part of having a successful garden. It is much more consuming to weed that same garden. It is much more hard work. As someone has said, when weeding, the best way to make sure you are removing a weed and not a valuable plant is to pull on it. If it comes out of the ground easily, it is a valuable plant. How many of you have done that? Whoops, shouldn't have pulled that one. Pastor Todd Weir, in his book, Wheat and Tares, wrote, "I learned more about weeds than I ever wanted to know as a boy in Iowa. Walking through the soybean fields to cut out the weeds was my summer job from age 13. A wise farmer once taught me that all weeds were not the same and could not be destroyed in the same way. A cockleburr had shallow but widespread roots and had to be pulled out to get all the roots. If you hacked it off at the ground level with a hoe, it would be back in a week. A milkweed had a very long taproot that could not be pulled out. If you did try to pull it up, 3 separate sprouts would be back in a week. Milkweeds had to be hacked off with a hoe and would bleed and die as the sap run down. If you didn't handle the weeds right, hours of back-breaking work in the sun would be completely wasted. Jesus knew his weeds as well. The meaning of Jesus' parable about the wheat and the weeds becomes clearer when we look at the specific kind of wheat he talks about. Tares are bearded darnel, mentioned only in Matthew 13, 25 to 30. And I hope I get this pronunciation right. It is the Lolium temulentum, a species of ryegrass, the seeds of which are a strong soporific poison. It bears the closest resemblance to wheat till the ear appears, and only then the difference is discovered. It grows plentifully in Syria and Palestine. The problem with taking our hoe to the evil weeds of the world is that good and evil look so much alike. It only becomes clear later. As I asked earlier, and a few of you raised your hands, how many of you have a garden? Whether it is a patio garden or a large garden or a garden that used to be a garden and is now a garden of weeds, you still have a problem with the weeds. And you have to weed the garden so that your tomatoes and cucumbers or your flowers can get all of the nutrients they need, right? But have you ever considered the definition of a weed and what it is? And as Paulette said earlier, it is simply something growing in a place where it is not supposed to be. I remember a story a long time ago about the most beautiful rose growing in the middle of some tomato plants. The owner of the garden said that he was going to pull it out, and when asked why, he said, "It's a weed in the middle of my tomatoes." A beautiful rose is a weed? Yes, if it is not where it is supposed to be. I suppose the gardener could have left it there and left it alone so he can enjoy the beauty of the flower and the fragrance that fills the air. You see, sometimes in our haste to pluck out the weeds in our gardens, we often pull out our green beans or radishes as well. Perhaps we should heed Jesus' words and wait patiently for our plants to grow larger and our vegetables are ready for harvest. And in doing so, we may pluck out a beautiful rose that's not where it's supposed to be, but a rose just the same. When Cindy and I bought our first house in 1976, we were so proud of ourselves. I was all excited because I had about a half acre of land that I could now plant a garden on. And I did. When March was almost over and it was going to be April, I went out and bought one of those rear-tine rototillers, a 5 horsepower model, so that it would have all the power I needed to cut through the sod and till my garden. It was about 100 feet long by 50 feet wide. Well, then I went out and bought all kinds of starter plants and seeds. On that first Saturday, I was able to put some of my plants in the ground. I was trembling with anticipation about the wonderful crop we were going to have from my very own garden. Well, it took over 3 weeks to get all of the plants and seeds into the ground. And before I even finished planting things, the weeds came up. Everywhere I looked, those insidious little plants were taking all of the fertilizer I had put into the soil away from my garden. These things were murderers, and I had to get rid of them. At that time, I was also working second shift at United Nuclear Corporation in Montville, Connecticut. So I was getting home from work at 1 in the morning, and I was up at 7 to start the battle of saving my garden from the invading weeds. Friends, it was a losing battle that merely sapped all of my strength and left me exhausted. In the end, I realized I should have listened to the words of Jesus. When asked, where then did these weeds come from, he answered, an enemy has done this. The slave said to him, then do you want us to go and gather them? But he replied, no. For in gathering the weeds, you would uproot the wheat along with them. Let both of them grow together until the harvest. And at harvest time, I will tell the reapers, collect the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned. But gather the wheat into my barn. Because I gave up and only rototilled between the rows of plants, at harvest time there was a bumper crop of beans and squash, tomatoes and cucumbers, and everything I planted in the garden yielded handsomely. Oh, by the way, when all of the plants in the garden were mature, it really was easier to tell the difference between what was a weed and what was a good plant. And I knew which ones had the vegetables on them. But you know, unfortunately, sometimes we in the church are quick to go into the fields and pluck out everything we believe is going to destroy the church. Drugs, alcohol, pornography, gambling, and of course, you know all of the evils of this world we live in. I do not have to list them all for you. We do not want to wait patiently for Jesus to touch the hearts and minds of those who we wish to bring into the church so Jesus can bring them into his fold through his love and compassion. We often want to just throw the offenders in jail and many times throw away the key. The old adage of don't do the crime if you can't do the time comes to my mind. How many of you remember that from the old TV commercials? But nothing is that easy, is it? There are often instigating circumstances we do not know of, or perhaps even understand, working on a person, preventing them, or more often than not, forcing them to live the life we so righteously condemn. Yet, my friends, we are the Christians. We are the ones who are supposed to be loving our neighbors. Every one of them. We are not called to condemn our neighbor because We do not approve of his or her living conditions, homelessness, joblessness, or even a criminal record. Jesus calls us to have compassion on them, all of them. And more importantly, to love them, no matter how they look, how they smell, or even what color their skin is. After all, we may have people in our own family facing the same obstacles in life. As a young boy, I remember my father's uncle, my father's older brother, DeBell. We called him Uncle Bill. He was suffering from shell shock after the Korean War. And my uncle lost most of his hearing while serving as a sergeant in the artillery batteries. Because of this, he had trouble finding jobs. He was often down on his luck, and getting married when he came home from the war added to his burdens. Then my cousin Frank was born, and then 5 other children. After several years of not having money because my uncle could not keep a job, my Aunt Teresa sued my uncle for divorce. The reason? He was unable to care for her and her children. My uncle then became like a hobo, a man with no place to call home. He was even arrested in Florida for vagrancy. His sisters, my aunts in New Jersey, bailed him out and got him a ticket for the bus ride home. For the rest of his life, he felt like a failure. And to be honest, many people treated him like he was. There wasn't any of the benefits from the VA for a police action. That was not really a war. In fact, many Vietnam veterans faced the same problems after they got home, including me. Because it too was not a declared war. My friends, this is only one story. But I am sure there are millions like it. People down on their luck, no money, no job. But what do we do to help them? Quite frankly, the answer is not much. We throw them in jail for vagrancy. We let them live out in the woods like those in the homeless camp in Danielson. Or worse, we do nothing at all. What can we do to help? And how can we do it? A friend of mine, Brian Souza, was the pastor of the Epworth UMC in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, 35 years ago. And he told me this story. One day a man came into the sanctuary looking for a drink of water and something to eat after the worship service. I asked him where he lived, and he told me that he and dozens of others lived in a camp along the Pawtucket River, not far from the church. Brian then told his congregation about the camp. The following Sunday, several members of the church packed sandwiches, bottles of water, coffee, creamer, blankets, and more, and marched to the camp to deliver those items to the people living in that camp. This became a ministry of the church for a few years. The members of the church often drove people from the camp to interviews for jobs, even gave them clothes to wear to the interviews. And they helped people find housing. All because one man asked for some water and something to eat. James Somerville tells this story. When a church in Wingate, North Carolina began a ministry to the children of the nearby trailer park, they had to decide what kind of ministry it would be. They could have chosen to root out all of the sources of evil in that place, to chase down the drug dealers and the deadbeat dads, to confiscate handguns and arrest child abusers. Instead, they chose to put up a basketball goal, to tell stories from the Bible, excuse me, to put their arms around little children and sing songs about Jesus. And 2 years after they started that ministry, 2 years of going out there Saturday after Saturday to do those things, the pastor got a note in his box at church with 5 words on it. Adrian wants to be baptized. Adrian, the terror of the trailer park. That little girl who had made their work most difficult during the previous 2 years. Who would have guessed? Instead of pulling weeds in the field where she lived, they just tried hard to be wheat. And somehow, Adrian saw that and fell in love with it and wanted it for herself. After she was baptized, there was a little more wheat in the field. And because she was there, soon there was even more. I know it's a hard question to ask, but have you ever thought about whether you were a weed or not? Are you where you're supposed to be? Are you doing what you need to do? Perhaps when you were younger, someone saw you, really saw you, and let you grow into the person you would become, instead of pulling you out and condemning you for not behaving properly. Or when you were a teenager, living rashly and rebelling against your parents' authority. People thought you were not a good son or daughter, and you were a bad seed. I gotta tell you the truth. If people did that to me, I would not be standing here today. You see, my friends, we are who we are because of the nurturing we received, whether as a weed or as a good seed. But all of it, my friends, is to the glory of God.